Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix, and welcome back to my rock and metal series. I'm very excited because today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite bands, which is Between the Buried and Me. And so, without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, I really like Between the Buried and Me, but I will admit that they were an unexpected band for me to discover back in about 2016, because at the time, I seemed to have a preference for, I would describe, alternative rock rather than metal. And so I didn't imagine this band as getting me to want to explore metal as an actual genre. And this would include the more intense aspects of metal, ranging from death metal to, I would describe, black metal, to a lot of the heavier elements of metal that exist. But Between the Buried and Me piqued my interest in music and what the metal scene is doing, and even though Between the Buried and Me are more in the lineage of bands such as Dream Theater, where they incorporate a lot of progressive rock, progressive metal, experimental elements, avant-garde metal, and the like, suffice to say it was a surprise when I discovered Between the Buried and Me. Ironically enough, I started from one of their more, I would describe, calmer songs, but this is by no means a negative thing, and it by no means implies that the song is not heavy. But the first song that I heard from them was called The Coma Machine, and I remember watching the video for this song. This song is on their album Coma Ecliptic, which is actually a pretty recent album, and I was very excited to hear this song, and I loved the video that I saw because it basically takes you on a journey. And even though I didn't quite know that much about progressive rock and metal at the time, I didn't know much about metal in general, much less progressive music, even though I had before listened to metal music and progressive rock before, I was very much caught off guard by their sound, and I loved it. And it didn't bother me that the song was about 8 minutes long. It didn't bother me that the song was complicated and very specific with its arrangements. But that song got me into them. And so I listened to their previous album from Coma Ecliptic, which was the Parallax 2, the Future Sequence, and that was like almost night and day for me because I would describe that album as being very heavy. While Coma Ecliptic focuses more on atmosphere in a sense and getting certain melodies and harmonies out of the way to be able to communicate something deep and beautiful, I would describe Parallax as being very in line with some of their earlier albums where it features a lot of yelling, or I would describe screaming. I wouldn't say yelling, but the screaming is actually what really got me into them and into metal in general, because I realized, oh, this is like a really interesting technique to scream in such a way, and to be able to do that for a 10-minute song, it was really remarkable. And I have loved the genre of metal ever since, even though, as I said, I'd already listened to metal, but I never really saw it as something distinct that I actually liked in music. And again, this was a few years ago, so there has certainly been a lot of time for these things to develop. So where do I start with describing the influence of Between the Buried and Me? And that is a valid question. There is definitely a lot to consider. They have many albums. I would describe Colors as being one of their most iconic albums, but for me, I will admit that album is almost too heavy for me sometimes. So quite an accomplishment that they were able to experiment with music in such a deep way to be able to capture the heaviness of metal while also capturing progressive elements. And if you're not quite familiar with progressive elements, I just mean in terms of the notion of adding different elements, different instrumentation, using music theory in sophisticated ways, and working really hard on the composition of the songs themselves. Not just having the kind of pop version of songs, which is the verse, chorus, bridge, and then chorus, as an example. And so, Between the Buried and Me is very important to this evolution of my music tastes, because I never really immediately realized how deep music can go. I mean, I had listened to some classical music, I'd studied it in school, but I had no idea that music could be so complicated, and I really owe Between the Buried and Me for that, for exposing me to something so much deeper. Now, their music is definitely heavy. As I described, Colors is a wonderful album to start with, but it is actually not one of my favorites. I think my favorites would be their last 3 albums, which are Coma Ecliptic, Parallax 2, and Automata, and it may just be the way in which I evolved with the band and the way in which I kind of enjoyed their music by what I discovered first. But they have a solid avoir. The Silent Circus, I think, is a classic in metal music. potentially it's been described as metalcore, although I would describe this album as being a little bit heavier than even some metalcore entries that I've listened to. And it really features like these like screaming vocals, the very specific what has been described as a Cookie Monster vocal, although I think that is more, I think the screaming is a little bit more nuanced than that idea, but that is how it has been described, and it isn't always pejorative to use that term. The overall point of which is their albums are heavy. I was thinking of the song Alaska, which is on their album Alaska, and I listened to that song right before making this video, and I have to admit, I really like that song. There are such fast changes, and if you watch the video, you can see a younger version of Tommy singing, and very much capturing the intensity of that song. I mean, with the fast transitions, I had described it as every death metal song made into one song, every death metal song ever written. And of course that's a joke to a degree, but I definitely would describe it as being similar to that kind of idea. I mean, the songs just have, that song specifically just has so much packed into it, and so many of their songs do. And it really is a very remarkable thing. One of my favorite songs is off Parallax, and that is the song Extremophile Elite, which is about a 10 to 12 minute song. And it's a complicated composition, and literally Tommy screams throughout the whole thing, which is amazing, even though he also sings as well. And it really is remarkable to me that you can have a singer who can do both clean vocals and harsh vocals. I mean, I find that to be remarkable. I mean, you definitely have to have a range and have to be able to know your technique to be able to do that. Now, I have to talk about my favorite song of all existence, which is Astral Body, which is the second track on the Parallax 2. And this song, to me, just captures the really amazing beauty of metal music and of music in general, progressive elements, rock, and music. And I recommend checking out the video, which has an interesting message. I don't know why that song has influenced me so much. There are a lot of songs that I like and that I've listened to throughout the ages, but ever since I listened to Astral Body, I decided that that was my favorite song ever, even more than the Coma Machine. And I'm not sure why that's the case, in all honesty, because I have heard a lot of other good songs, even by Between the Buried and Me as an example. But that song, I think what does it is when he gets to the end, well, I should describe the beginning where there's a lot of screaming and there's a lot of heaviness, and then there's a little bit of clean singing, and then the ending where he sings, "Speak to me freely, I am listening." That just is so soothing to me, and to have that in the context of such heaviness and packing so much in a 4-minute song, it's just a punch in the gut. And I really recommend that song. Again, I can't describe like all of the reasons as to why that song has influenced me so much, and I guess that's part of engaging with art, is you don't always know why it impacts you the way that it does, or even how. But it is a very amazing song, and I really like it. And it's brought a kind of seriousness to my life in a positive way, while also helping me imagine the creativity that we can have with music and with art and with the things that we express. And I find that to be very beautiful, that they are able to do that. Now, Between the Buried and Me is a very forward-thinking band, even though their albums and compositions and songs have been very complex as of now. With all of their albums, I believe they have 8 studio albums at this point. Even though they already have this complexity, they're a very forward-thinking band. I mean, sure, there might be some doubts on whether or not they can continue to be so aggressive and so heavy. Certainly, we've seen bands such as Asking Alexandria and Bring Me the Horizon take on softer tones in their music. Even bands like All That Remains, where they feature a little bit more probably rock elements, I would describe, and this isn't bad, but it is interesting to see how this band has evolved throughout the years. And when I listened to their song Blot, which was off their album Automata 1, the last song on the album, I was amazed that they were able to keep the heaviness to that song, even though they have so many albums. And they really seem to want to keep the heaviness of their music, and they want to keep that alive, and they want to keep that going. And that, coupled with the notion of forward thinking, of continually pushing themselves and pushing their boundaries. I mean, honestly, I don't know how a band does what this band has done. I don't know how they are able to accomplish it, but the fact that they have is really remarkable. And it's definitely very impressive. So there's much more I could describe with Between the Buried and Me, but we'll just leave it at that for now. And I hope to talk about this band more in the future as part of my rock and metal series, because they have definitely influenced me. So check out their music, check out their discography, and see what piques your interest. And while I have heard the description and critique that their music might be a little bit too harsh in a way, perhaps because of the vocals or the heaviness of the guitar and the distortion, or who knows what exactly it is that people find heavy, I still encourage you to check them out. They will definitely take you on an adventure. All of their albums, from what I can tell, are concept albums, so they're definitely telling a story, especially with albums such as The Parallax and Coma Ecliptic and Automata, where they are telling a complicated story throughout their compositions and throughout the albums and throughout the music. And I think that it's amazing. Thank you for stopping by my channel. I hope that you'll check out my other videos, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.